is up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome to FudgeMuppet. My name is Scott, and I'm here with Michael and Drew. We've got episode 3 of the Elder Scrolls podcast, talking all about the Ayleids. But before we jump into that, I just want to thank all of you guys for the epic support. But seriously, it means a lot to us that you've been engaging a lot and liking the video. And if you can and haven't, throw a like in there and comment any good feedback you've got, because
only
it
good
helps.
Feedback.
Only good feedback, because it helps the podcast get out there. Share it with your friends. It just means a lot to us, and it's one of the things we are really enjoying doing at the moment, because we get this nice big, open discussion. So let's get into the Ayleids. Drew, I'm going to put you on the spot. Give us just a general overview of what an Aylid is.
An Aylid, in a way, kind of like the Durrani. Then it's not like the Chimera in that they came from Somerset and the Oldmer and then just totally changed overnight. They were very similar in culture and appearance to the Oldmer, so that's the ancestors of the High Elves, and that's kind of what you imagine. But then they moved to the Heartland. They're one of the groups that went over there not to like run away from the Oldmer culture, but basically just to settle the mainland. They became a bit tan because it's a bit warmer over there. And other than that, they're just elves who...
We can get straight into it.
I'm going to give some insight as well. They came there, I'm fairly sure, after Topple the Pilot sailed all around.
Well, this is what I was going to say. We're about to go into the origins.
Topple the Pilot sailed all around Tamriel, stopping off in various provinces, seeing various things along the way, eventually taking a wrong turn, because he was looking for Aldmeris.
Yeah, so Topple the Pilot was an Aldmer dude looking for Aldmeris because they'd lost
supposedly.
it.
And
so they were coming from Somerset, going for a look.
And while he was charting, he ended up going straight up into Cyrodiil and all of the area around there. And it was interesting because he saw cat folk around there, or cat demons as it was called in the text, and also the feathered men who he basically gypped in the biggest trade, the best trade deal.
Well, they seemed all right about it, like the bird people. Like, they were fine with it.
But I mean, it was unfair.
As we know, the bird people are gone afterwards, but it's interesting because there's a lot of credence. At least I think there's no reason to. So some people disbelieve the Topple stories, are these bird people even real? But I'm there's no reason to disbelieve it. And the whole feathers and bird imagery and stuff like that is something that is a big part of Aylid culture. They're often described with feathers and beads. And if you look at their statues, the way they envision Auriel as this big sort of golden eagle looking thing, and a lot of their armor has little bird-like motifs. And if you think of Cyrodiil as a jungle back then, lots of exotic birds around, you can imagine the sort of environment that kind of gives them that imagery.
Oh, for sure. And I mean, they traded the ability to read and write for the 8 Isles, basically Cyrodiil.
But then they were gone though. So it's interesting. Maybe the Ayleids pushed him out later. But this is all Merethic era stuff. So this is a solid while before recorded history. It would seem.
Plus, something tells me that if the bird people had said no, they probably would have taken it anyway.
Yeah. There's some kind of Oldmer descended thing, and I don't know where they are in the sort of timeline. There is a question here. I'll have to find who exactly it was from, but it was basically trying to work out when of the races came, and I think this is a big loaded question. When did the Chimera leave? Did they leave after the Ayleids? Which I would kind of think yes, because Topple sort of dropped into Cyrodiil first, and then I guess the Ayleids sort of started then, and then Chimera and so on. But I guess we won't get into that too, because we don't have to get into the whole Aldmeris discussion this time round, because it's pretty simple. Topple rocks up into Lake Romare, and then he or some group of Oldmer inhabit the Isles, and then I guess Ayleids sort of start in that area when Cyrodiil was a jungle, not a transcription error. But so we can start talking about Ayleids in general. So to start off with, like Drew was saying, they were really similar in culture. Besides some of the aesthetic and kind of things, in terms of they were Aedra worshipping. But as time went on, they did get a little thing going for the Daedra and certain Daedric princes and some of the really vile ones. But they didn't have the same attitudes to the Chimera, where they were exclusively Daedra versus the Aedra. They're kind of like all of it, you know. And it depends on the king, because the Ayleids had an empire, but it was more like they didn't have an emperor. It was more like a coalition of kingdoms, and lots of kingdoms would have their own microculture. Like, you know, this kingdom might be dedicated to Molag Bal because their king really endorses that one, or that one might be dedicated to Xerxes or something like that. Like, they were a little bit more. It's not.
Yeah, there were Aylid groups who actively denounced worshipping most of the Daedra, perhaps with the exception of Meridia.
Yeah, the Barbasic, I think that's how you pronounce it.
Barsabic,
like
or
something like that.
Yeah.
Ayleids, and they're ones that left, and they ended up in Blackmarsh later on, and they've got some cool connections. But we'll sort of get to that. But we can kind of like talk about their society a little bit, like their magic. So we don't know enough about, like, or before they were sort of like, you know, Adric sort of elfin, but let's talk about when it gets interesting, which is basically around the First Era, because I'm pretty sure that division we were talking about just then, where some of them kept to their Aedra, the Barsabic Ayleids, it was, in 198, there's the Scouring of Wendelbeck, and there's basically pro-Daedra Ayleids versus against the traditionalist ones. So then there's a bit of conflict there. But so it is sort of in the first centuries of the First Era where the Daedric worship is kind of becoming a thing, and they're going, you know, a little bit far. I don't know how they viewed Meridia either, because Meridia's got like different significance because Magna Gi stuff, and then also their obsession with light and so on. But yeah, let's just, one of you guys can take over and start talking a bit about their technology, culture, because they've got some cool technology.
Well, I mean, as you just said about light, so they believed in the 4 elements rather than earth, water, air, and fire. It was earth, water, air, and light. So they were obsessed with light and starlight, and you can see it in their technology with the Welkin stones, the Vala stones, the Aylid wells, and things like that. They were obsessed with kind of harnessing that magic, and it seems like almost ahead of their time, they were aware of the fact that starlight and the sun is what brings magic into the mortal realm.
Yeah, well,
you know,
sorry, I was going to say we'll have to go into another episode on this, so you guys can, if you are keen for it. But the idea that back in the day, the further you go back in history, the more magical and advanced everything is, and the further you go in the timeline, the less like magic sort of seeping out of the world, or there aren't Daedra roaming, and there aren't all this cool like crazy feats. Like in many ways, the like not technology, but magical technology of the ancients was far better. And talking about the light and Welkin stones and so on. So they use this meteoric glass to make the Vala stones and the Welkin stones. And what's interesting there is that someone actually pointed out, I'll find the question in a second, but it was basically that they wouldn't need soul gems. It's kind of a revolutionary technology in that the Vala stones, they can use just magic from Aetherius and capture it in the Vala stones, and then recharge their weapons as much as they want, which is also powerful on the battlefield, like them with their basically unlimited. Well, they need the Vala stones, but it's like solar energy. It's like unlimited. Like they can just keep using their Aylid wells.
It's basically like a battery, you know, that they can carry around with them. And more than that, though, if you think about, instead of them attacking but defending their cities, if they've got wells, like, you know, you can just have mages standing around, kind of just, you know, pooling unlimited magicka in for defense, for killing people, like, you know.
Well, that's what I was reading with those. If you remember in Oblivion, like one of the things you needed for the big portal to Gaia Lata was a greater Welkin stone, and apparently these were these giant, Welkin stones, like huge versions of them, but they often like powered the magical systems of all the ruins, and like, so that they basically hoarded these massive sources of them, and a lot of them got pillaged later on. That's why you can only find the one in, I forget which Aylid ruin specifically it is, but yeah, like it's kind of cool. It's like this magical power source for their entire ruins, but that's like revolutionary too, like the way that they could just restore magicka with Welkin stones and so on. And they were, I guess we may as well like kind of we can start exploring, I guess, how they would get into the Daedra, and one of the easiest ways would be through Meridia, because she is associated a lot with the light. She was a Magna Gi. she's right into it, and she's sort of like her, like we said in the previous episode, her realm is a reflection of Aetherius's light into her realm, the colored rooms or whatever. And then like, so she's sort of got this big obsession for it, and so do the Ayleids. And so they have these sort of like united goals in a way in that kind of research. And then also they're enslaving all the Nedic people so that they need some Daedric armies to help them do. And I guess we can start moving into that. Like, it's also not just Meridia, but there was also, I think, like Molag Bal and Mehrunes Dagon and Hermaeus Mora is another one. I think they're four that are mentioned specifically, but there are more. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like, you know, if you look at their descent into worshipping Daedra, I find it really interesting. I mean, obviously the pull there is to get more and more power. And it's a shame, though, because eventually it kind of turned into cruelty. It wasn't just power for the sake of advancement. I mean, a lot of these ancient civilizations were the most advanced and could have been great if they didn't, you know, disappear like the Dwemer, or kind of bring their downfall upon themselves by devolving into kind of... I mean, if you throw away your moral compass, you can justify, you know, using the Nedic people to kind of do your work for you. It's not a good thing, but obviously it's effective and it works to do that. But when you get to the stage where, you know, they're doing torture and they have their gut gardens and they have the wailing wheels of Vindasal or Vindacal, however you want to say it, things get a lot more, I guess, wasteful.
Yeah, well, that's like, I guess it sort of coincides with them sort of starting to worship the Daedra and bringing those elements in, is that they're kind of like that archetype of an ancient society that got too hedonistic, and that elements, I guess that's kind of their pitfall, is they sort of thought they were so great they can just harvest as much magic from the Starlight as they want. They've got all these super powerful enchanted swords and Daedric armies at their command. There's these powerful sorcerer kings. So yeah, they're just like burning children alive for sport and so on, and like, you know, all of these hedonistic pleasures. And I'm sure there's some substance abuse and like all kinds of stuff going on. But and that really is a big reflection on their like treatment of the Nedic people as Nedic slaves. But obviously not all of them were like pro-slavery, because some of them come and help. But I think we'll get to... we may as well start talking about like the biggest of all Aylid events. Like, this is where we know where all of the writings of this time is where we get the most information about the Aylids, which also does mean there can be some inherent bias. Like, some people speculate that with all of these gut gardens and wailing wheels of Vindazel, stuff like that, that it is just like bias. But I'm pretty sure there's even a scene in ESO. It's just like a flashback of ghosts or something, or...
Yeah. I can explain it. So I believe it's actually in Shadowfen in Blackmarsh, and they're kind of talking about their slaves and their ghosts saying to each other, oh, you know, what do you think of my slaves? And the other one's like, yeah, their skin will, you know, be great texture and color for, you know, your flesh sculpture stuff that you're working on, this kind of torture, Daedra-inspired arts, as they were called. And, you know, it's like, yeah, it'll rival the wailing wheels of Vindasal, ha 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 ha, you know.
Yeah, so we have a little more first-hand confirmation.
But it depends who you listen to. I mean, I'm not the biggest fan of Lady Cinnabar, nor Phrastus of Ellen here. You can find them both in the Ebonheart Pact base arguing with each other and dissing each other. But she says, you know, oh, if you cherry pick kind of, yeah, the Ayleids sound so bad and so on. But yeah, I think there's truth to the idea that a lot of them weren't, but I still think plenty were. I mean, you know.
Plenty, especially if you're believing like some of the sort of Songs of Pelennor kind of stuff. He goes on, there's a lot of elves to massacre that he did, although, to be fair, Pelennor also just kind of massacred anything that remotely looked like an elf, including a whole bunch of Khajiit. But yeah, so the setup, basically Alicia, the slave queen Alicia, gets help from Akatosh to basically do in the Aylids. And then also get some demigod sort of champions, Morahouse, son of Kine, and who's their man bull, or like an actual bull with wings, or like there's a few sort of different interpretations. But then also Pelennor Whitestrake. So Drew, do you want to
Well, before we get into the rebellion, I did want to say that like the Ayleids is the perfect example of why the good Daedra was so important to the Chimer, because having the good Daedra to guide them meant that it wasn't just outright Daedra worship. So they were told, no, these are bad Daedra. Don't worship these guys. Use them to learn from them, but do not venerate them. And the Ayleids didn't really have rules like that. They would just follow whoever they felt like following, and I think that's a big part of where it all went wrong. So
yeah, well, I think that's the other thing is they had like the Chimer from the get-go with the Psijic endeavor, and they have this like really sort of like tight philosophy that kind of, involved the good Daedra, House of Trouble, so on. But because they were such a small group to begin with when they left and went to Resdane, it allowed them to sort of keep that monoculture sort of very like sort of, and they were very zealous about their religion, whereas the Ayleids were actually, like we said, a more of a sort of coalition of multiple kingdoms. So it's kind of up to the specific kings that they might decide, I want to worship this one. And then because this particular king, authorizes it and says it's cool, then a lot more people gather on. And basically, they weren't as politically unified as the Chimer, I guess.
Well, a problem can arise from that as well, because if you allow some kings to worship certain Daedra, for example, it's clear that Molag Bal was very important to a lot of the kings, especially in the most prosperous kingdoms. Because if you think about it, the kingdoms that did the best were the ones who enslaved, dominated, turned to cruelty.
Yeah.
And all it takes is one kingdom to incite the rebellion. Which is it? Sard? Is that the city that Elysia was in? Or I can't remember exactly which city she was in, but she was in one where it was really bad.
Yeah,
so,
I think
one
it
rebellion
used to be
starts.
like Sard. It used to be called Ayleid or something.
Yeah, and then it's shortened to Sard or something. But basically, yeah. So it's like, if you have unrestricted Daedra worship, all it takes is a few bad apples, a few kings to take it too far. You got your rebellion.
If you look at the songs of Pelennor, like one of my favorite, I always love like just these like cool little descriptions of some of the kings, like Pelennor fighting Haramir of copper and tea into a duel at Tor and ate his neck veins while screaming praise to Riemann. But like, I think it would be pronounced Gordhau, the Shaper's head, or like smashed upon the goat-faced altar of Ninandava or something.
I think Pelennor
But, like,
has some of the coolest stuff, like even eating the neck veins. That's so intense. And then shouting a name that hasn't even been known of yet, from the future. I just think that's so cool. Oh, by the way, sorry to interrupt, but everyone check out All in All's animated opera of Pelennor. That is really cool.
But yeah, he did like, if we talk about the Ayleids through the lens of Pelennor, we actually get a little bit of information on a whole bunch of them, and then like pretty much all our information is going to be through the lens of like the rebellion and so on. But I love one of my favorites is Fire King Hadhul. I just think it's such a like cool thing, and he's an example of a particularly cruel slave master, where the slaves were subjected to tormenting drugs and children were set aflame for nighttime tiger sport. But he gets killed by Pelennor as well, and rightfully so. But it's kind of, I love the titles and so on, and I'm a big fan of a lot of the sort of more poetic texts in the Elder Scrolls books that sort of, they kind of feel like you're reading some epic mythology or some epic, like the poetic Eddas of Viking mythology and stuff like that. It's like an epic song kind of vibe versus just the informational ones. But then again, they're more likely to be embellished. But so what's interesting too is that their whole thing goes under in basically inside of a year. Alicia's rebellion is really quick. But she also has the help from a whole bunch of other Ayleids who don't want to. Like one example is the Ayleids of Nenalata, which is one of the known future vassals of the Elysian kingdom, at least for a little bit. But not all of the elves agreed, and they wanted to get rid of the Daedra worship, and that is why. By the way, this is important because they were using Daedric armies, which was a massive problem for the rebellion. Whereas, in addition to their obviously elven armies, but that's why the pact with Akatosh blocks out Oblivion, like closes off the gates of Oblivion, basically, so that they can't just summon upon these huge armies. And it's a big... So yeah, that's basically why that pact is so important and it exists, so that basically humans can't be cheat-coded by a bunch of Daedrics summons Daedra, you know?
And I mean, what did they expect worshipping Aedra, who, you know, many of them talk about, oh, be good to one another, be kind to one another, and they're all like, yay, let's worship them, and then also worship Daedra, who would completely fly in the face of those teachings?
Yeah. But, I mean, Drew, do you have any other things that you really want to mention about Pelennor, the Songs of Pelennor? Because we don't want to go make the whole episode about Pelennor, because there's a lot of cool stuff there. But
I mean, most of it will come up when we talk about Umaril.
Well, that's what I was about to say.
So,
Before we get to Umaril, I was like, are there any last, like, notes? Like, let's also talk about, like, we could just briefly mention the whole, like, demigod kind of thing. And there's these ideas that he's a Shezarene, or, like, kind of Shor, a.k.a. Lorcan, sort of reborn, taking these different forms and starting all these human kingdoms, and this is one particular incarnation. And then there's all the cyborg from the future stuff. I think you could just watch our videos on that if we.
I mean, I can safely say I don't think he's mortal.
No, he's definitely not. But so out of all of the Sorcerer Kings, there's plenty of cool ones, but obviously the one that stands out the most is Umaril the Unfeathered. And what's interesting is that he supposedly has a divine father, but that divine father is Meridia, like, and an Aylid mother. So basically, well, that's how it's been interpreted. Like, I guess there's other ways you could interpret, like, his alliance with Meridia kind of imply, like the divine father could also not be Daedric, but the way that people have sort of put it together is that he is a child of Meridia, because he looks like the Aurorans and stuff as well, which are Meridia's Daedric servants. And yeah, they're obviously, like, interlinked. But there are some other interesting... I'll have to find it. But
well, one thing is from... I don't want to go too far ahead, so I won't spoil anything, but Umaril specifically says this about his father. He listed his bloodline in the Ayledun and spoke of his father, a god of the previous Kalpa's world river, and taking great delight in the heavy ugliness, which... Oh, wait. I'm getting mixed. Okay, I just read past a line, but basically talks about how his father came from the previous Kalpa's world river.
Yeah. There's lots of, like... We'll have to do a Kalpa episode at one point, because I know that's a very, like, strange out thing. But look, basically, he's got some, like, cool demigod status stuff going on. And that's part of the reason why he can kind of come back in the third era when you do the Knights of the Nine DLC. And, you know, you go and fight Umaril in the sky, which is... It's like a cool set piece, but it's actually not, like, the best battle. Like, some people are even saying, and from what I remember, he wasn't that hard.
Yeah, it was
or at
easy,
least at the point...
Maybe because I'd played so much Oblivion, you kind of have, like, a god character. Because, to be fair, you know, the gatekeeper of the Shivering Isles, in the lore, the gatekeeper is meant to be, like, unkillable.
True.
You have to go get Relmina, the creator's tears, and poison your weapon with it and all this. But if you come in at a high level, you can just shoot him down with, like, 3 arrows and not even do that part of the quest. So you have to keep those kind of things in mind.
Yeah, it's kind of designed, because, I mean, Umaril's pretty short as well. He's not the tallest. He's, like, high elf height. Whereas you'd imagine being a bit more, like, when you see some of the artworks, he's, like, towering over Pelennor.
Right, yeah.
Yeah, which is much cooler. I wish he was towering. But, yeah, so what's interesting, too, is he's responsible for Pelennor being, like, decapitated and being split in different... Pelennor beat Umaril, but the other... I have to find out. I think it's the other Sorcerer Kings.
Yeah, the other Aylid kings came and they killed him, and then they dismembered him into 8 separate pieces, because they were obsessed with this number 8.
The 8. And we'll get to that in a second. And then that's where Morahouse has a little chat with Pellennor's head as well. But we may as well actually jump into that, their obsession with the number 8 and the significance of Ayleids on all culture. So you got to understand, at that time, like, the Needs were slaves for quite a while, like, for generations. They knew nothing else. So their gods were also the Aylid gods. So the Elysian Rebellion had a lot of help from the Nords, who were basically just conquering all of the North at this time. So this is in the second 200s. Year 242 was the Elysian Rebellion. And the Skyrim Conquest started, well, actually, not started, but were said to have finished, well, swallowed up Morrowind and High Rock by 240. So basically the Nords are widespread as hell, and they've got stuff under control. And then they also helped. But to sort of create this new culture, this new Cyrodiilic culture of men, Elysia had to make a pantheon that both agreed with the sort of Aylid kind of Aldmeri kind of religion that all of the slaves and the elves believed in, as well as the Nord stuff. And that's where... And I think like Aylid obsession with the number 8 is also why there are the 8 divines, like that they only chose 8. Because theoretically, like you could have picked more. There's more to pick from both sides, but she just sort of made them into the 8 of them, you know? Which we know as, you know, your classic imperial cult divines that have lasted for a long, long time. Cool, man.
Yeah.
Well said.
Yeah. So what I think is we can talk about now is so that happens, new culture starts, but what we have is a first couple of, I don't even think it's they doesn't even last for more than 100 years, but there is this period where for 100 years after Elysia's death, so there's a bunch of Aylid vassal kingdoms that are all working, such as Nenalada, that are all going along fine. But I bet it's less than 100 years after Elysia's death. I had this as
Which
a note
Pelennor
written
was
down.
supposedly present at after he died.
Yes, yes. But basically, they ended up telling all of the Aylids, you're no longer lords anymore. You're going to get out, and otherwise we'll massacre you all. And they did. Whoever stayed got massacred. And this is all because after Elysia's death, there was the prophet Maruk who came up with the idea of the one true God and you know was visited supposedly by Elysia's spirit with all of these new laws and so on. And basically the Elysian Order became like this big sort of theocracy almost that basically was indistinguishable from the Empire's power structure. So it became this really like zealous nutcase kind of place pretty after. So like the little golden age of Elysian Rebellion, it's like really, if you look at like the good it did, maybe during Elysia's death and her Minotaur son Balhaza or whatever, for however long that lasted. But as soon as the Elysian Order started kicking up, things went downhill. At least if you just weren't a human. I guess if you're a human, it's all right.
Well, it is interesting that they chose to have the Ayleids there. I mean, the Ayleids had actually run an empire, whereas the slaves had just been slaves. So, you know, regardless of your natural ability, there's a lot of experience still, you know?
Well, I think that's kind of part of the reason they did.
Yeah, and then the second they figured out how to run things themselves, see you later.
Yeah, like you're out. I guess too, while we're here, because we will in a little bit we'll talk about the late Aylid periods, like the Aylids that then disperse and go elsewhere and left Cyrodiil, and Aylids throughout the rest of history. But let's talk about White Gold Tower, which was supposedly built by the Aylids to reflect the Adamantine Tower, which is in High Rock. But there's some interesting sort of speculation with the Aylids. So in this regard, so at that time, I mean, is there anything you guys want to drop in? But before I keep running my mouth,
not particularly. I think I'd get started on a tangent about the whole towers theory, and it's not.
Well, yeah, not to go into the towers too much, but there's the whole. Someone was asking about this actually. I keep saying it, but like, look, I read your questions and I've tried to incorporate this into the talk. But White Gold Tower sometimes is attributed to the reason why Cyrodiil isn't a jungle anymore. That somehow the Aylids kind of built it, and then the warm tropical environment suited them. So White Gold Tower sort of changes the territory of Cyrodiil, and then when the men, you know, took over and they're sitting on the ruby throne and so on, it all becomes temperate, like the more northern people, the Needs and the Nords, would be accustomed to, and that it sort of explains that. I don't know if I buy that. To me, honestly, I think the most, even though it's already a little contrived, the most airtight explanation is that Talos became a thing and just went click, done. It's not a jungle anymore, and retroactively changed it. Or
I
whatever.
prefer that one.
Yeah. Because there's already that kind of retroactive time-breaking stuff multiple times throughout. Like, it makes, especially with, like, the Tribunal and so on. So there's already a precedent for it in the universe. So just do that. The transcription error is the weakest thing. That's, like, comical. I'm glad at least, because that was introduced in ESO, I think from the Phrastus of Ellen here guy. But then there's Lady Cinnabar who says the tower one, saying that the tower transforms the land. But I don't even know how, like, there's an interesting discussion on the towers to have at some point, but I don't want to, like, derail it too far.
Plus, there isn't really other examples of towers changing the landscape dramatically. I don't know, that one, right, as far as I can think of anyway.
Yeah, I can't think of any off the top of my head. And the other thing, too, with that whole towers theory is I'm just not quite sure how it worked or if they kind of did even build it. Like you could even theorize that they didn't. Just because I feel like, you know, Red Mountain is there already, Adamantine Tower's there already. If High Hrothgar is like Snow Mountain or whatever if that's the other tower.
But isn't the Numidian or like the brass
Elden Tree? Yeah, that's considered one of the towers too. So of it, there's a few like created towers, but look, we don't know how exactly all this works. But there's the idea too that like each tower that was built kind of like cements reality more, and that's why like magic kind of isn't as loosey-goosey as it was in the early Merethic era, like the earliest Dawn Merethic era times, because they kept building towers that are metaphysical. Look, it's kind of a whack theory, and we'll start getting derailed.
It's kind of involved in Elder Scrolls Online as well, with the White Gold Tower and the Telvar stones, which are basically like, you know, they're saying they made the towers from these, and they have magical powers, and that the Daedra are kind of chipping away at the tower and removing these stones for some kind of purpose. So there's that as well.
Yeah. I'll just have a quick. I'm just gonna have a quick scan of some questions. There's a funny one. It's like Galmir 5. Why don't the Ayleids have Myr in their name? I have no idea why. There is no. Just I guess they That's just how their classification. I feel like in early lore they have another name like it's like Saliarcher or something.
Who knows what they were called back then? I mean, heaps of people had different names back then. Like even Elysian had a different name.
Yeah, well, that's not her real. Yeah, because she's got her real name's unknown.
No, wasn't it Alesh or something?
She just had a slave name. Well, that's her slave name. Yeah.
She does. Yeah. It's not. They're all like, because I'm pretty sure Elysia even means, or one of them they translate to something divine or something.
The high is what Alesh means.
Yeah. But what I mean is this Saliarche was like their descripted, or it's probably got some better pronunciation than that. But there was also a few names for like Dunmer or High Elf, like equivalent of the ending in the CHE. So like it's basically before the Myr thing. I feel like it's an earlier lore thing, like from Daggerfall, that's sort of been left over. So I forget what the. Oh, let me. I mean,
it is kind of just weird in general because you don't have to have men on the end of every race name for humans. I mean, I think they know, they know what they are. They don't really need elf written on the end.
Yeah. Yeah, and it might also be a little bit more of, because a bit more of like a cultural distinction as opposed to sort of like a genetic kind of one. Like, they might have identified more with like Oldmer or whatever, but they are still like, they would call themselves Ayleids, but it's not the same kind of difference as like Orsimer or something like that, or the Dunmer even. But yeah, it kind of all becomes semantic kind of stuff. We're just gonna like go down. But Glesser was asking, I'd really love to hear the lore behind Aylid architecture and the logic behind it. In Oblivion, they are dungeons, and they're supposed to feel, well, dungeon-like, but is there any lore about them? Honestly, any kind of Aylid architecture talk would be cool. The most honest-to-God answers, I think, is it looks so cool because it's modeled mostly off Lord of the Rings, which was the hot topic at the time back in that in those days, and that's why Oblivion as a whole has a big tone shift from Morrowind and looks. It really takes like it's Lord of the Rings, but in a fantasy sort of thing. So there's a lot more of those sort of like aesthetic.
That's why
cues
orcs in Oblivion look as creepy and scary as Lord of the Rings orcs.
Yeah.
A bit more green though.
Well, Shrek also came out in 2001, so they were just sort of riffing off
that was
that.
a heavy inspiration.
Yeah, but I mean, obviously there's part, and this is going to be with like everything, but like the dungeon feel and look for the most part is just to accommodate gameplay. Like,
Yeah.
it's not always going to be the most like perfect actual livable structure, but I mean a lot of the torture devices and so on that they had in there, or like, you know, the big like spiked gates and stuff that would come and fling at you, and traps, like that could easily be explained by like we're having fun by sending slaves.
But they weren't exactly practical. I mean, some of them is just the main hallway will fall down into a spiked floor. Like, you'd have to dance around that if you were living there all the time. There's not exactly beds or rooms to sleep everywhere either, if you think about it. But I mean, that's more like a limitation of game design than it is like a lore thing. For example, if you go and visit Sursen or Vindasal in Oblivion, they're quite small and underwhelming. One of them is the one where the lady corrupted by Umbra is, and it's like there's not much in it. And
Well,
the other one, there's some traps and bandits and stuff, but there's not
they
really
could have
much.
also once, like, because their ruins like spread further on the exterior and so on, because they're thousands and thousands of years old, so they could have been degraded and so on. Like, another thing too is like, I think this is in reference to the Dwemer stuff actually, but in the Dwemer ruins, but like, you see the structure and the stone and the metal left behind, but like fabric degrades and all of these like biodegradable things, or wooden chairs and stuff like that. Like, they might have had plenty of wooden chairs and furniture and all this kind of stuff, but it's just not there anymore because it's degraded and been eaten. So yeah, you're left with a plain stone room. So it looks, so yeah, there's a lot of other stuff that could be going on, but yeah, ultimately it's very cool. Like, I appreciate the architecture now, but it's very like Lord of the Rings elven. Like, if you look at every single Aylid door, you remember in like the Fellowship of the Ring with the Mines of Moria, like that, it's like literally looks exactly like that kind of thing. So but yeah, it's cool. I do appreciate it. But if you go to Morrowind's sort of lore, originally the interpretation of glass armor, that spiky sort of alien stuff, that was supposed to be like a high elven kind of armor that they made. And also that sort of goes in with like, you know, they're like glass cities and stuff like that, with the Crystal Tower and all that kind of stuff, and the Somerset Isles. They were supposed to be sort of like this, you know, more alien sort of crystalline aesthetic kind of thing, less, you know.
Yeah, well, the way Alinor used to be described was very like alien, as
Yeah.
opposed to Rivendell or Lothlorien type.
Yeah, exactly.
Visuals, so-
Like, they've just ripped, and that's fine. Like, I still like that. But I'm usually a fan of the more exotic kind of stuff.
Oh, for sure. If you play Elder Scrolls Online, like, I was running around there the other day, and it almost feels like, as you were saying before, Shrek. I feel like I'm going into like the princess's kind of like, you know, domain. It's very fairy tale. Like, it doesn't feel like any edgy alien Elder Scrolls like kind of stuff to it. It's still very cool, but yeah, just different vibes to some of the books and old lore.
And all the Breton kings are basically just Lord Farquaad as well. So
Yeah. Here's another question actually relating from Bastian Nightsab or something. What's the connection between Ayleids and the Dwemer? Both extremely advanced mer races that live in underground megalopolis. Megalopolis. Or whatever. Anyway.
Megapolis, yeah.
Anyway, megalopolis.
I mean, I'd say none.
But it says one manipulates light and the other manipulates sound. Both achieve extreme power, fall victim to it, and vanish.
I think he explained the
I think it's a
similarity in
poetic-
the first sentence anyway. They're
Yeah.
both
But there's
ancient mer societies.
There's a poetic connection. I like the idea of one manipulates light and the other manipulates sound, but ultimately not really. And to be honest, Dwemer heyday was, I think, later than the Ayleids a little bit. And yeah, I don't know. I don't know if there's much of a connection.
It's mostly
really.
just the hubris. You know, they get really powerful and excel, and then eventually it's their own downfall, which is pretty much, you could say, the same for most empires in general. they just expand so much until they die off.
Yeah. They need to consume, So, and if there's nothing left to consume, they consume themselves. But another questions, there's a few more Umariel questions. Before we get to some of the later, because I kind of break it up a bit, just deal with everything we can Aylid first. The Auroran heritage of Umariel the Unfeathered, and why is he called the Unfeathered? I wonder if it is some sort of like, because of his armor or Daedric connection, like the lack of feathers, because Ayleids were often described as using feathers and stuff in their sort of like
whereas
aesthetic.
the Auroran armor is very pristine,
like, sleek, and maybe because of that Daedric heritage, that's why he's called the Unfeathered, because he didn't like have the same. Maybe I don't know if that armor's born onto him or what, but if he doesn't, it's kind of like distinguishing him from the rest of them. He's unfeathered. He's not like one of the normal Aylid born exceptions. But yeah, I don't think there is that much. Umariel's such a cool character, but I think all of these cool characters, it's like when you actually talk about them, there's not as much to say as you'd think. But like Pelennor, it's cool because Pelennor just killing them all, but they're usually just like, they're just basically like, what do you call them? Like, just crosses off on his hit list.
Yeah.
But they're cool.
I think your imagination does most of the work for you when you read such a poetic kind of story like that.
Yeah.
You kind of create your own idea of who these people were in your head outside of just what you would see, for example, in Oblivion when you kill them.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's then get on to the late Aylid period and some of that stuff. So there's the 100 years. So less than 100 years after Elysia's death, you basically, all of the Aylids are either told, get out of Cyrodiil or we're going to massacre you. Those who stay behind get all killed. And there's a bunch that have fled to all these different kinds of areas, like into Black Marsh, Valenwood, High Rock. And basically they often went to other elven populations. And the boring, really boring answer to it is a lot of them just probably assimilated and got absorbed by the local elven populations, whether that's the Durrani in High Rock or the Bosmer in Valenwood, or if they went to the Somerset Isles. Potentially, you never even know, but maybe some particular ones went to the Kaimer and the Dwemer, or even the Falmer. I don't know if that fits in with the timeline as well, but not really. I don't think so. Maybe, but what I'm saying is they could have gone and with any sort of number of elven populations, because a lot of them you think too, it's not always going to be a case of a king and a full like political faction just upping and moving. A lot of it's just going to be just a few sprinkled here and there, one particular family, just some children or whatever. So they'll probably integrate pretty well. Whereas there is the case of, does someone want to take the pronunciation again? Of
we're talking about Leloriaran.
Yes, Leloriaran.
Yeah, well, he kind of puts a name and a face to the idea that the Aylids could still be operating, because really, yeah, as you just said, the idea is their names would be bred out. They'd kind of just turn into whatever culture they go to. But with Leloriaran Dainar, the last king of the Aylids, he's actually involved in the downfall of the Elysian Empire, which is kind of cool. Yeah.
And, well, he goes to, first, he goes to build a city, doesn't he? Founded the city of Bisnensel in High Rock, which was supposed to be a bit of an imitation of Nenalata. But they lose that to a cult devoted to Hermaeus Mora called the Primeval Seekers. But then later he goes off and becomes a general in the Durrani army, who were teaming up with the Nords even, and the Bretons to fight against the Elysian Order, who were going nuts in their expansion at that time.
Yeah, I mean, that's the good thing about Elder Scrolls Online. It actually did offer some clarification on the specific Daedra that the Ayleids are said to have been making deals and working with and stuff, because before Elder Scrolls Online, there weren't that many specific mentions.
Yeah.
Of like, oh, they definitely worked with, Molag Bal and this and that. It's just heavily implied.
And this Dainar guy, he got caught in Cold Harbor and remained there for 3,000 years. So a bit of a Mirak kind of situation, like slowly living in oblivion. And then he's obviously involved in the events of ESO. But there's also I forget her name. It's like something with starts with a T. She's a sage or something that was living in Valenwood, who's said to be an Aylid or trying to.
Yeah, there are rumors
had
that
that
there are
name
other
before.
Ayleids
Yeah.
still out and around, but like, you know, it's all unconfirmed and mystery.
Yeah, the Aylids. Yeah. We can get started while I find this. On Mankar Cameron. He's one of the potential potential.
You'll have to show that meme I posted on Twitter about what like the connection between Mankar Cameron and the Aylids. But basically, you can be like, Mankar Cameron claims to be a Bosmer, yet his skin is lightly tanned like an Aylid, and his paradise looks exactly like an Aylid city. The surviving Aylids supposedly assimilated into Ultima nobility on Somerset, which means Mankar could have met the Falmor. The Aylids hate men in the Empire, and so do the Falmor. Could the Aylids be plotting the downfall of mankind by weakening the Empire that wiped out the Aylids?
Ooh.
Right. It's good. It's like there's stretch in some areas or something.
Oh,
but then
yeah,
I
it's
can
a
also
massive
believe it.
stretch.
Yeah, but
It's
like
still
it's a fun theory.
Wasn't much of a meme
But
though. Was that the meme?
Oh, what I literally made a meme
Oh.
where it's like a woman and a man sleeping in bed together, and she's like, "What is he thinking about?"
Oh,
and then
right.
he literally is thinking all that.
Yeah,
Yeah, like
yeah.
explaining the meme makes it completely unfunny.
No, I get it now.
But yeah,
Context.
but yeah, that kind of makes Mankar Cameron a bit more interesting as well, rather than just being a random wood elf who for some reason was drawn to Mehrunes Dagon. Like he's interesting obviously because of his commentaries, but giving him that extra motivation kind of like really makes both the Aylids and Mankar Cameron more
Well,
exciting.
they talk about doesn't Mankar Cameron talk about like kind of remaking himself with Mehrunes Razor or something?
Yeah, he literally does say that. I'll have to find
Maybe
that.
he made himself an Aylid.
Yeah, here's a. By the way, just a quick reference to who I was talking about. Indeed, this is from the book The Wild Elves. Indeed, one of the finest sages of the University of Gwillem was a civilized Aylid elf. Tjurhane.
Churhane Fear.
Jurhane Fear. But basically, she was born in, according to this little time thing here, in the really late First Era, 2790, and then lived until year 227 of the Second Era. So, one of the whose published work on the Wild Elves suggests a lively, vibrant culture. Fire is one of the very few Aylids to speak freely on his people and religion. I always thought it was a chick. Oh, there you go. It's on his people and religion. And he himself said the nature of the Aylid tribes is multi-hued, their personalities often wildly different from their neighboring tribes. But yeah, so basically there were some up and like throughout the First Era, but to be honest, I feel like they're kind of gone. I feel like some might be, it's the kind of thing where it's like, that person might be like, oh, I'm 1/8 Viking, you know, like 1/8 of my like, you know, or you know, 5% of my I did ancestry DNA and 5% from Norway or something. And they're like, I'm a Viking. I feel like that's the kind of thing where like some Bosmer or Ultima or Durrani or whatever might be able to trace it back to a sort of concentrated amount of like Aylid blood in their
But
veins.
then they'll get what happened to me, where it says I'm 25% Scandinavian, and next week I'm 0%, and then the next year I'm 5%. Who knows?
But yeah, like I mean, they're not doing DNA tests, but like it just in the lineage. But yeah, so ultimately, I don't think they're not around anymore. It's the same as the Dwemer. Everything it's sort of like a bit of a hopeful stretch most of the time, and they're cool, but. I mean,
'cause the
some
thing
of
is-
them are around as liches. But
I mean, you can look into the like L'Oreal, and you can be like, oh, he actively took part in getting revenge against the Elysians. But then, you know, you can then say, oh, Aylids integrated in the nobility of the High Elves and the Durrani and whatnot, so they could be involved anytime the Elves do something against men. But it's like, Elves are going to do that shit to... Elves are going to do bad stuff to men anyway. So, you know, it's hard to say it's the Aylids. It's just kind of a romantic idea that they're still doing something.
yeah.
Same with the people are the same with the Dwemer, that the idea that they're not completely gone.
And I'm so at peace with the idea that they're gone. Like, they're cool, but a lot of things in history are cooler too because they're history as well. You know, it's the same as even our real world stuff. Like, heaps of the romantic idea of them. You know, but I don't actually want to know about, like, or maybe I do, but I understand it's not everyone wants to know about, like, Aylid crops or, like, Aylid, like, do you know what I mean?
It's the same as Pelennor. Like, Pelennor sounds way cooler in these stories that, you know, inspire imagination. If you actually went back and, like, learned the truth and learned of the embellishments, perhaps it just wouldn't be as interesting.
Maybe, but people say that a lot with a lot of those embellishment, which is obviously partly true. But the thing is too, it's like you are living in this hyper magical world. Like, it's very possible in regards to the Elder Scrolls things that.
So you're saying that Riemann's conception might be exaggerated or embellished?
Oh, I think it's spot on, to be honest.
Yeah, the king making love to a hillock.
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, he just sort of carves out a little bit of soil.
I mean, who hasn't done that?
Yeah, and then he got some little shepherd woman grabbed him, put him on the ruby throne, and then he spoke in a fully grown man's voice and says, "I am Cyrodiil come." What up? That's pretty mad. Dude, Riemann, first era lore is the best. The second you enter the second era, it gets incredibly boring really fast. Well, not boring, but, like, it gets
incredibly well documented and realistic, and, you know, compared to the first era, at least.
But then again, I'm like, there's sort of mythological ideas for us about, in our world, about things that are only like 2,000 years old, whereas they, like, even the second era is a really long time away from the fourth era. You got like 200 years back, then you've got back another like 433 or something like that. So you're looking at like 630 years. Then you've got like, I think it's nearly 900. It's like 896 or something years of the second era.
Yeah.
So like you're looking at a decent amount of time. And that's how crazy how like far back the first era kind of stuff is. But one thing we can also talk about, just talking about like people claiming descendants and so on. I'm pretty sure, I might just have to look it up. Hold on. Nenalada, the quest in where you're going around getting the Aylid statues in Oblivion for that dude. He doesn't he claim some sort of ancestry or something? Is like Umbacano.
Yeah,
that's right.
I remember him.
Umbacano. Or is he just he's just ultimate mage and suspected Aylid revivalist.
Revivalist could just mean the culture. It doesn't mean he has anything to do with it.
Well, it's like pagans nowadays.
Yeah. Yeah, and the crowns. Yeah, so I think it's just he's just enthusiastic about it, which is cool. But it'd actually be a dangerous sentiment to have in the like that would be very controversial, like an Aylid revivalist, because it's like, you know how like there's things with a big like historical bad guys, like you can't be.
Oh, I mean, he becomes a bad guy. Spoilers, but he tries to kill you. He goes down into the Aylid ruins, sits on the throne, and says, I'm reviving the Ayleids. You're about to witness the glorious rebirth of Aylid civilization, and then summons a bunch of undead saying, "Arise, my people," and turns on you.
He's just role-playing, man. It's fine.
Yeah.
But yeah, to be fair, they were pretty distracted at that time in history anyway.
That's true.
What with the Oblivion Crisis.
Yeah, I don't... Aylids are actually... That's what makes them kind of interesting, I guess, and you have to fill in a lot more, but there is a lot less to talk about than you'd think.
I mean...
a lot of it does end up being speculation.
Yeah. You could talk about their magic. I mean, they were very, very good at magic. They were said to have invented the alteration school of magic as it is known and categorized today, and shape-shifting and all this kind of stuff.
Actually, yeah, isn't the creation of alteration a pretty cool story in that they were hiding from the Elysians and they used the levitate spell? Am I remembering that correctly?
I don't know if it was the creation of alteration in that moment, but I do believe that happened.
I can't think if it was it might be an Aylid story, or that might be a thing with Vivek.
Oh, I read it
It's-
recently.
I don't think it's
I'm
Vivek.
pretty sure it's an
Yeah,
Aylid story.
I'm actually going to find it now.
There's a few interesting things, but yeah, Aylid society, it is cool, but it's over.
Yeah.
You
And
know?
they were probably powerful necromancers as well, given, like, if we're saying the liches are them, there's
Yeah.
plenty of liches around. And they also had, in Skyrim, Calixto's trying to bring his sister back from the dead. The Blood on the Ice quest. I've been dealing with this quest way too much recently for the Flesh Magic video. And he's got in his journal this Aylid transcribed text about kind of reviving a body with all the ingredients you need and stuff like this,
Yeah, isn't there a cool quote there that was a translation from an Aylid?
I'll get it
phrase?
for you.
What
I'll
did it-
find it for
Something
you.
about like
So-
scrying the edge of the ice line or
yeah,
something.
it's pretty cool.
So while you find that, I found the source as well. So the idea was that it was the Siege of Bravil, or Bravil. Bravil.
Bravo.
The Siege of Bravil, where an Elysian general, Tassus, got into the city 4 different times to take out the Ayleids inside, but they were just not there. And it turned out that some of them had been levitating up to the high walls, while others were using water breathing underwater. And that was kind of the founding of alteration spells. Obviously putting them into schools is kind of weird in general, but like those spells were kind of founded there.
Yeah.
But that's a cool story.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
so here's the Butcher Journal too. You've got the ingredients, which I won't bother to list, but then it says, "Star scrying to the edge of the ice mind, look to the lights where the souls dance, revealing the time when a spark will revive when the rotted united under most skillful hands."
Yeah.
I don't know if they've got a typo here. Isn't it rotted unites under? Anyway, but it says translation from Oldma text as interpreted by the Ayleids and first transcribed by Ultima. Provenance and authority unknown.
To be fair, there are a lot of spelling mistakes. I mean, the source I was just reading had eyelids instead of Aylids. So
Yeah. Unfeathered title.
Yeah, it's unites.
Yeah, I feel like as a whole, they're just sort of don't cry because they're gone, smile because it happened. Kind of
well, are there
smile
any
because the
question-
Daedric-loving, enslaving elves happened.
I've been doing too much of this smile because it happened stuff recently.
What, like just having a social life and leaving the house in 2020?
Ah,
Smile because it happened.
oh yeah, but also like things like series and stuff that you like that kind of reducing quality over time, and you just don't cry because it's over. Smile because it happened.
I mean, yeah, there's the Witcher TV show, which I
Oh,
hope
you love
nobody
it.
watched.
You love it. Come on, sing it. Sing the song.
I didn't get far enough to hear the song. I've never heard the song. Yeah, I don't want to hear it. But it's a shame because that would have been great for a Witcher series on the channel.
I think
but,
I'll still watch it.
I mean, let me know what you think. But I watched one episode. To be fair, I only watched one episode and then gave up.
It
but
does get better.
was just so
it does get
awful.
better, but it will never. It will
Halfway.
never
I mean, it
be,
couldn't get worse. Yeah.
It'll never be what you wanted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
It gets better halfway. Like I'd watch the next.
Were
season,
there
but I'm not
any questions that we didn't quite answer that you've still got there, or is it pretty
I
much
think
all
it's
covered?
largely everything.
It's pretty much covered. Like there's the lore behind. Like there's some people asking for specific what's the lore behind the Vala stones, the Welkin stones, and the Aylid wells. Well, it's pretty much they used meteoric iron to build these Aylid wells, which could absorb magicka from the sun and stars, like the light. Like there is no. There's nothing really else to say about them, and then they used these little cheat codes called Welkin stones and Vala stones just to restore their weapons and their. It is interesting that the Vala stones do. It's because the Vala stones are a little bit different in the way that we don't quite understand it. Because traditionally enchantments we only use they're powered by souls, but Vala stones are using just light. That's a pretty
I mean, they
power.
could store their memories in them as well.
Right,
have
that?
you heard about? I need to find the exact source because it's been so long since I wrote about them.
It's
but-
different.
I believe
it's
it.
different from the memory stones of used
What-
in Hammerfell, right?
Yeah, it's definitely different. But there was it's something about they could store their thoughts in it, and then it was actually a problem. It could be a problem for mortals to read it because it was a problem of capacity. I need to find the exact source now.
I do remember this.
You can open up Welkind and Vala stones and try and find it. So we may need to
And
skip.
so, I mean, there's a picture here of an Aylid memory crystal in Elder Scrolls Online.
That might be associated.
I'm sure.
I don't know how. Yeah, like when you need the information that you can easily find, it vanishes.
Yeah. So.
Just like the Dwemer.
Yeah. So
a
the
little
Cradle of Imerus holds the Vault of Memories, a library of secret knowledge possessed by the Wooded Eye, and a shrine to Hermaeus Mora. The Cradle also contains at least one Aylid memory crystal, which encapsulates memories or information on the Aylid kings Gordha the Shaper, the Fire King Hadul, Haramir of Copper and Tea, the Flower King Nilichi, and Umriel the Unfeathered.
Yeah.
So there's something.
It says overuse of these crystals can cause a problem of capacity for mortals, apparently, according to the events of ESO, which this particular one I'm not familiar with, but there you go.
Righto.
I can throw another little fun fact out there is they have their own language, Ayladun, if anyone was interested.
Yeah.
Which, is that a derivative of Elnifex as well?
Yeah, they pretty much all are except Hist, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, they all look similar when you look at the alphabet.
Yeah, just Hist. But the interesting thing, though, is Ayladun is one of the only Elven languages that has an influence on your typical Cyrodiilic language, because the slaves spoke a similar language to the Aylids, their overlords, for generations. So, like, if you're Cyrodiilic, I mean, this is according to like multiple breakdowns and stuff, but also, like, obviously Nedic, so a mix of Nedic, Ayladun, Nordic, and then there's also some Akaviri influence because of the Second Era, well, the First and Second Era, but the Second Empire.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, everything I was going to say from here is like a tangent. I was going to say it's interesting that the Slode derive their language from Elnifex as well, but these are not conversation topics to be having in our Aylid videos. So.
Yeah, another little piece about Umriel, and this is kind of talking about Aldmeris. Unfeathered wings broken off with sword strokes delivered while Pelennor stood, frothing, above him insulting his ancestry and anyone else that took ship from old Elnifey, which is Aldmeris, which is the name for Aldmeris. And that angered the other Elvish kings and drove them to a madness of their own. But that's a kind of like interesting kind of thing, like insulting them for leaving Aldmeris.
I mean, he's Pellennor's an interesting fella. He's hard to understand, but you know one thing for sure, and that's that he hates the elves and always has.
Yeah, well, Pelennor himself was is said to be a few different people.
Yeah. Well, there's that as well. But maybe we'll save that for a Pelennor podcast. One day.
Yeah, I'm just.
sure.
I mean, I think we're pretty much done,
Yeah.
but I'm just trying to think of anything that we've like missed or we've. Because there just isn't as much as we wish we could tell you. Like, we covered the Vala stones and all that stuff. We covered the elements. We covered the flesh sculptures and art torches. Oh, the other thing I guess is, and once again, it's varying stories on the origin of the Amulet of Kings. The Kimel Adabal. The stone was said to be the crystallized blood of the heart of Lorcan, and they made that into the tower's founding stone for the White Gold Tower. But, you know, there's also their little 10 ancestors, the statues sacred to the Aylids that you went around collecting for that bloke in Oblivion.
That bloke.
Yeah, I don't think.
Well, I think that brings us to the end. It's been an hour. It's been a good chat about the Aylids.
Yeah. All right. I think that's about it.
I've run out of
Let
Let
Aylid
us know what
facts.
topic you want next.
Yeah, actually, let us know what you do want to see topics on next. Like, we might actually try next time to pick a topic with like a little bit more of a subjective interpretation or like deeper discussion. You know what I mean? Just because like the Aylids are actually kind of rather just they are what they are. There isn't really, and there is no like. It's not like the Dwemer where there's like, ooh, how did they disappear? Like all this stuff. There's, you know what I mean? It's just. They just died out. That's about it. But yeah. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for watching. And we'll be back to nerd out with you again next time.